In the heart of the Vatican, the Paul VI Auditorium glowed under the warm light of its golden lamps. The walls, adorned with Renaissance-era frescoes, seemed to whisper secrets from bygone times. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation for an unprecedented event, the first cultural gala of Pope Leo XIV's papacy, the first American pope to occupy the chair of Peter. The event, conceived as a symbol of unity between the sacred and the artistic, gathered the Vatican's elite, cardinals in their purple robes, impeccably dressed diplomats, renowned music critics, and prominent reporters with their cameras at the ready. At the center of the hall, like a profane altar, rested a majestic Steinway grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the multicolored lights from the stained glass windows like an obsidian mirror. Marco Salvetti, Italy's most acclaimed pianist, stood tall beside the instrument, exuding the presence of a commander in his stronghold. His tall, slender figure, clad in a flawless dark suit, radiated a mix of arrogance and magnetism. Salvetti wasn't merely a performer. He was a living icon. Known both for his mastery of the keyboard and his openly skeptical stance toward religion, he had accepted the Vatican's invitation not out of faith, but due to an offer so substantial that even his ego couldn't refuse. To him, this evening was nothing more than a well-paid contract, a perfect showcase to display his talent before a global audience, despite his disdain for all religious rituals. The audience's murmur faded as Leo XIV, formerly known as Cardinal Robert Prevost, entered the room. His presence was understated, almost modest, though he wore the papal robe with grace. His blue eyes, reminiscent of the sky over his native Chicago, emitted a warmth that disarmed onlookers. As he walked down the aisle, kindly greeting attendees, he paused momentarily before the Steinway. A flicker of wonder crossed his face, as if rediscovering an old companion. He approached slowly, caressing the lustrous wood with reverence. "Save your prayers, Your Holiness," Salvetti said, his voice sharp as glass, breaking the room's solemnity. "That piano is worth more than many homes," he added with irony. "I'm sure you understand. Perhaps we should each stick to our specialties." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the hall. Cardinals exchanged shocked glances. Reporters quickly focused their cameras, sensing the onset of a sensational story. Cardinal Torretti, a robust man with flushed cheeks, stepped forward, visibly disturbed. "Maestro Salvetti, please show deference to the Holy Father," he said, his voice agitated. "Perhaps we should contact the Rome Conservatory and find another performer." But Leo XIV raised his hand calmly, his voice firm yet gentle. "No, absolutely not. Maestro Salvetti is exceptional in his art. I'm looking forward to hearing his performance tonight." The ensuing silence was so profound it felt as if time itself had paused. Salvetti, perplexed, raised an eyebrow. "Wait, you know who I am?" he asked, bewildered. Even in the most refined circles, pianists were rarely recognized by name, let alone by an American priest. "Of course," the Pope replied with a genuine smile. "I spent hours practicing your arrangement of Chopin's ballad in G minor on my old upright piano in Chicago. Your version is brilliant. I've also frequently worked on Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor. It's a demanding piece, but immensely rewarding once its complex sections are mastered." The confidence on Salvetti's face faltered. His eyes narrowed, a shadow of irritation crossing them. "Excuse me? Are you saying you can play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor?" he said sharply. That piece was considered one of the most intimidating in the classical repertoire, capable of overwhelming even the most seasoned musicians. "Look, Your Holiness," he continued, unfiltered, "I respect people's faith, but a pope shouldn't lie so blatantly. That piece has ruined professional musicians." The silence was overwhelming. Cameras captured every expression. Murmurs buzzed like a swarm of rumors. Reporters knew they had a global exclusive. Cardinals shifted uneasily in their seats. Critics exchanged silent glances. "I assure you, Maestro, I'm not lying," Leo XIV said, with humility that contrasted the accusation. "Music has been my refuge since childhood. My father was the one who taught me." Salvetti's expression turned mocking. "Oh, this is magnificent," he exclaimed theatrically. "The Pope's father gave him piano lessons in their Chicago apartment. What's next? Did your mother gift you a toy keyboard for Christmas?" He turned to the cameras, raising his arms. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold, the American Pope who believes he's the next Horowitz." Cardinal Toretti, his face on the verge of collapse, intervened. "Maestro, I demand respect." Salvetti let out a biting laugh. "Respect? For magical tales?" He pointed at the Pope. "Tell me, when you weren't blessing hosts, did you also tackle Liszt's transcendental etudes or dabble in some Prokofiev during your spare time?" Venom dripped from every word, but Leo XIV's eyes never left his. "YouTube?" "Indeed," he replied calmly. "Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 is delightful, and Prokofiev's Piano Concerto No. 3 has a fascinating harmonic structure." The hall plunged into absolute silence once more. Salvetti's expression wavered before he regained his arrogance. "You're lying," he growled, swallowing a curse. "Do you seriously expect us to believe that?" "The Goldberg variations have been my meditation lately," the Pope continued serenely. 30 variations built upon a single theme. Bach understood that true complexity arises from simplicity. A music critic in the third row dropped her pen, astonished. These weren't pieces mentioned lightly. They were true gems requiring years of study. And the Pope spoke of them with the ease of someone who had lived them. But Salvetti wasn't ready to concede. His world, built upon decades of pride and elitism, was beginning to crumble, and he wouldn't let an American cleric steal the spotlight. At this point in the story, as the tension between Salvetti and the Pope reaches its climax, I'd like to take a brief moment to thank you for being here. Creating content like this requires dedication, effort, and resources, and your support means a lot to me. If you're enjoying this narrative and wish to help me continue sharing stories that inspire and move, please consider making a small contribution to the channel. Any support, no matter how modest, allows me to keep doing this work. The link is in the description. Thank you for being part of this journey. Enough. NPR. Salvetti's voice thundered through the hall like an explosion. "Do you want to provoke me? Very well." He approached the Pope, his finger pointing firmly inches from his cassock. "I've spent 4 decades honing my technique, 40 years of injured fingers, practicing to exhaustion, sacrificing everything for music." His voice trembled with anger. "And you think you can waltz in with your elegant white attire and Chicago tales to make me look like an amateur?" Cardinal Toretti stepped forward, his face flushed. "NPR. Security, remove this man immediately." But the Pope said nothing. Instead, he raised his voice with a serenity that sliced through the chaos like a knife. The hashtag Pope Pianist was catching fire on social media. A critic in the third row dropped her notebook. Her hands were trembling. "This is impossible," she whispered. But it was real. The Pope's hands were a blur. They glided through Bartók's most treacherous passages with supernatural clarity. Cross rhythms that defeated professionals, harmonies that demanded not just technique but a brilliant mind. Salvetti clutched his head, as if trying to keep his world from collapsing. His confidence, his prestige, were unraveling with every measure. The Pope didn't stop. His white figure seemed to merge with the instrument. The music wasn't coming from the keys, it was coming from his soul. He ended the piece with a final chord that shook the air. But he wasn't done yet. Without pause, his fingers launched into Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11, a transition so perfect it seemed like magic. The audience could barely believe it. After the storm of Bartók came the crystalline grace of Mozart. The notes danced with sublime lightness, yet the technique remained flawless. Every phrase was a gem. The ornaments were precise, the crescendos exact, and the emotion so genuine that more than one cardinal had tears in his eyes. Salvetti, now as pale as a sheet, murmured to himself, "This can't be." But a nearby microphone picked up his voice, and within seconds, thousands of online viewers were sharing the clip, amplifying the Italian pianist's embarrassment. The Pope, unfazed, let Mozart's final notes fade slowly before beginning Debussy's Clair de Lune. The transition was so fluid it felt like the piano itself was breathing. Impressionist melodies filled the room, every note struck with accuracy, every pause delivered with a sensitivity that made the atmosphere feel almost unreal. Diplomats who had initially attended out of protocol were now leaning forward, entranced by the music. A conservatory professor in the front row let out a soft sob, overwhelmed by the beauty of the performance. Even the sound technicians, usually indifferent, exchanged incredulous glances, their hands frozen on the console. Salvetti, leaning against a column to avoid collapsing, looked like a man trapped in a dream he couldn't escape. Everything he believed about music, spirituality, and the world was crumbling in real time. Each note from the Steinway was like a spear piercing his pride. He had tried to ridicule an American priest, exposing him as a fraud, but what stood before him was an artistic level that Machadif not surpassed his own. His breathing turned erratic. His hands trembled as he tried to grasp what he was witnessing. "He's not just skilled," whispered a Corriere della Sera critic to her colleague. "He's something else." The Pope glanced up for a moment, locking eyes with the audience with a humility that contrasted sharply with the grandeur of his performance. "Perhaps something more demanding," he said softly, his voice hiding the intensity of what was to come. His fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, the same piece Salvetti had dismissed moments earlier. The room was engulfed in a sonic flood, thunderous octaves, fleeting arpeggios, and intricate harmonies that defied all logic. The Pope's hands moved with almost supernatural precision, navigating the most feared passages of the score with a fluidity that made the impossible seem natural. Salvetti stepped back further, his legs wobbling. "No, this can't be," he murmured, but his voice was drowned by the avalanche of notes pouring from the piano. The audience was frozen, unable to look away. Reporters with phones in hand watched as the videos went viral within minutes. Pope Pianist was now trending in 17 countries, with millions sharing footage of the American pontiff mastering one of the most complex works in classical repertoire. "My God," exclaimed the conservatory professor, tears rolling down her cheeks. "He plays it better than many professionals." The Pope reached the climax of the concerto, a section so challenging it had ended careers and shattered egos. His fingers danced over the keys, each note brilliant as crystal. The frenetic rhythm did not shake his precision, while his ecclesiastical robes floated like wings around him. It was as if his childhood in Chicago, his days in neighborhood chapels and seminaries, were being channeled through his hands. He was not merely a man playing an instrumente, was a soul connected to something greater, a living declaration of devotion and vocation that transcended any title. Whether pontiff or artist, when the final notes of Rachmaninoff faded into the room, the silence was absolute. Pope Leo XIV sat still on the bench, his hands hovering over the keys as if trying to absorb the last echo. Then, with the same humility with which he began, he stood gently, adjusting his vestments with an almost invisible gesture. "Thank you for your attention," he said softly. His voice was barely a whisper within the general reverence. All eyes turned to Salvetti. The man who minutes earlier had paraded with arrogance was now frozen. His face, white as the marble surrounding him, tried to form words, but only a hoarse sound came out. "It can't be. No one plays Bart like that. No one." His hands trembled so much he shoved them into his pockets, as if to hide his defeat. Cardinal Toretti, seeing Salvetti's collapse, spoke with a tone far softer than his earlier anger. "Perhaps something more accessible, maestro?" he suggested compassionately. "Maybe that Chopin version you're so admired for." Salvetti swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the Steinway as if it were a tribunal. He walked toward the piano with uncertain steps, like a man approaching his sentence. The instrument that had moments ago produced near-heavenly music now felt like a silent threat. He sat down, his hands hovering over the keys with an unfamiliar insecurity. When he finally began the first notes of his famous arrangement of Chopin's Ballet No. 1, they sounded weak, human, ordinary. He missed a low note with his left hand. The right hand faltered in a familiar passage. The rhythm turned unstable, like a wounded bird trying to fly. A music professor in the third row covered her face, unable to bear watching an artist see his identity fall apart. Salvetti's performance collapsed after only a few measures. His hands pulled away from the keys as if the piano had burned him. He remained seated, surrounded by an uncomfortable silence. As the final off-key notes floated in the solemn Vatican air, the audience held a respectful, quiet, but the contrast between both performances said more than any standing ovation could. Where Pope Leo XIV had displayed brilliance, Salvetti exposed the fragility of his ego. The silence that filled the Paul VI auditorium was different, now not charged with tension like at the beginning, nor with admiration like during the papal performance, but with a near-sacred stillness. The final off-pitch notes of the failed performance still echoed, but their resonance sounded more like a lament, the sound of someone whose pride had been dismantled in front of all. The Italian pianist remained seated, his trembling hands hovering over the keys, as if unsure what to do. His face, pale as the marble that adorned the room, was frozen in a look of total defeat. Cardinals, ambassadors, and journalists watched in respectful silence, aware that this was more than a musical stumble. It was the downfall of a man who had built his identity on the belief that he was untouchable. Pope Leo XIV, standing beside the piano, adjusted his vestments with a calm, serene motion. His eyes, a deep blue reminiscent of the calm of his native Chicago, settled on Salvetti with a compassion that embraced not just the broken man before him, but all of humanity. The audience held their breath, not knowing if the Pope would speak, offer comfort, or walk away in silence. But Leo XIV was not one for hollow gestures. He had already touched everyone's soul with his art. And now, in this fragile moment for his rival, he was about to show that his greatness didn't end at the piano. Salvetti looked up, his tearful eyes meeting the Pope's. "Forgive me," he murmured, his broken voice barely audible in the vast hall. "Forgive me, Your Holiness. I was so wrong." The words stumbled out, loaded with shame and regret. His hands, which moments before had failed to produce his acclaimed music, now hung at his sides, purposeless. The Pope stepped toward him, no trace of triumph or arrogance on his face. "Maestro," he said, with a voice so gentle it wrapped the room like a warm coat. "Music has been my companion since childhood. My father, may God hold him in peace, taught me that true art doesn't come from what we believe or don't believe, but from the time we give to our vocation, humbly serving beauty itself." His words resonated in Salvetti's heart like a perfect chord, but also like a call to confront his own faults. Tears began to stream down his face, first discreetly, then accompanied.